Ryan, what's on your radar?
So when Sirhan Sirhan appeared at his parole board hearing in late August, he brought with him the memory of 15 failed attempts that had left the convicted murderer of Robert F. Kennedy no closer to release after 53 years in prison. His problem, he had become convinced, lay in his inability to accept responsibility for what he knew that he had done. Sirhan has long claimed that he has no memory of the moment Kennedy was killed. It happened in June 1968 at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, just moments after Kennedy had won the Democratic primary in California. This is ABC News footage from that night. Sirhan Sirhan has long acknowledged that he brought a loaded gun to Kennedy's California primary night victory party and that he drank heavily. But it took a yard full of fellow convicts to walk him toward a place where he could accept responsibility for the decision to bring the gun to the party, without which, he told the parole board, the crime couldn't have been committed. Accepting that responsibility and shedding his defensiveness was key to winning the support of the parole board. Sirhan no longer presented himself as the victim of circumstance or lashed out against aggressive questioning, guaranteed ways to lose a parole board hearing. Sirhan didn't arrive at those epiphanies alone. A team of fellow prisoners at the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego County, California, collectively took up his cause, coaching and mentoring him through the process through a prisoner-run organization called Redemption Row. They even conducted extensive mock parole board hearings to dissect his responses and redirect him toward a more empathetic place. The collection of prisoners who guided Sirhan couldn't have made a more unlikely crew. There's Suge Knight, who founded Death Row Records, Joel Baptiste, a former leading figure in the Aryan Brotherhood in Life for Murder, Mexican mafia leader Artie Guzman, Roque Martinez, a top boss in the notorious crime syndicate Nuestra Familia, Cameron Morris, a former member of the Crips, and Michael Goodwin, convicted of the high-profile killing of Mickey Thompson in the 1980s and his wife in the couple's driveway. Each of his fellow inmates, in turn, was able to show Sirhan that they shared his experiences, said Jen Abreu, head of the organization. Knight, for instance, was able to speak to Sirhan about the experience of being globally despised, being something of an anti-celebrity himself. I'm a global villain myself. People think I killed Tupac, and that was Tupac. You killed a Kennedy, Suge Knight told Sirhan, according to Abreu and Baptiste. So I interviewed Joel Baptiste, who has become friends with the former rap mogul, by phone from prison, and he added, quote, Suge was able to talk to Sirhan about, I know what it's like being the guy, being hated or blamed for this or that, oftentimes erroneously. He was able to identify with him on that level. The biggest thing you can do for a man in prison is look at him and say, you're not alone, man. You're not alone. I'm standing with you. And we're going to do this process and do it together. Baptiste said that his crew put the word out that Sirhan, who'd recently been the victim of a near-fatal attack in the prison, was not to be touched. Once Sirhan felt physical safety, opening up became easier. The effort to assist Sirhan began early this year, and it involved endless conversations with the 77-year-old Palestinian immigrant. The mock parole hearings, Abreu said, were held in the day room, in Sirhan's unit, in the yard, in the chapel, and while walking with him on the track. In the week leading up to the hearing, the murder boards, often involving 4 inmates, went for more than 8 hours a day, grilling Sirhan with every possible question he might hear. Now, most prisoners have a significant history of trauma prior to confinement, and all experience it while serving time. The Redemption Row inmates dig into that trauma, said Baptiste. Quote, we're looking to find the nexus of how your trauma started. That's what we did with him. We went back to Palestine and talked about the things he saw. Baptiste continued, we tried to really provoke him, get at things he doesn't want to talk about, identify those things and dive into them as deep as we can. And then we'll do it in a rapid-fire fashion. Before one of the questions is answered, we'll ask him another one, try to get him stressed out, try to get him a little confused. Prosecutors at his murder trial alleged, citing notes Sirhan had left behind, that he was motivated to assassinate Kennedy by the senator's support for Israel. The parole board dove immediately into the politics of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict at Sirhan's hearing. Abreu, who testified at the hearing, witnessed the full event, though a transcript is not yet available. Sirhan broke down emotionally under the questioning, Abreu said, but was able to recover his poise, which she credited to his work with the inmates. At one point, a parole board member asked him why he spoke up about the suffering of Palestinian children and not Israeli children, a remark that would have triggered an angry reaction from him in the past. Instead, Abreu said, he paused, collected himself, and told the board, with all due respect, I never saw any Israeli children. A board member noted that if he were to be released, he'd be a hero among Palestinians. Sirhan responded that he does not remotely consider what he did heroic. Sirhan has long had trouble discussing the Israeli-Palestinian situation. He was born in Jerusalem in 1944, 4 years before what Palestinians refer to as the Nakba, the successful declaration of the State of Israel. His home was taken over by proto-Israeli insurgents. One afternoon as a child, he saw an elder in the neighborhood leaned against a wall and thought he was sleeping. When he got closer, he told the group, he realized the man had been shot and killed. One day, drawing water from a well, he pulled up a human arm. He watched as his brother, Munir, was run over and killed by a Jordanian army truck that was, quote, serving to escape Israeli gunfire, unquote, according to documents in his psychological evaluation. Sirhan was so distraught at the death of his older brother, the evaluation reported, that his mother named her next son Munir. Munir now lives in Pasadena, where Sirhan hopes to return. Guzman, in particular, helped Sirhan open up about the violence in the Middle East. At the age of 17, Guzman was a helicopter gunner in Vietnam and told Sirhan about the carnage, watching bodies blown apart in a war where he had no animosity against the enemy. Having a top-ranking member of the Mexican mafia talk about trauma and its consequences, said Baptiste, helped Sirhan cut through what they called the, quote, toxic masculinity that was standing in the way of confronting his own. Morris, the former Crip, told Sirhan about the people close to him who died of gun violence and the way those losses changed him irrevocably. Hearing about gun violence from the perspective of the family of victims, said Baptiste, helped Sirhan see his own crime from the perspective of the family of victims who suffered as a result. Aside from Kennedy, 5 others were wounded at the Ambassador Hotel in the shooting, and Sirhan addressed each individually at the hearing. One of them, Kennedy aide Paul Schrade, now in his 90s, spoke in support of Sirhan, arguing that the man had reformed and served his time. Some of Kennedy's children have urged Governor Gavin Newsom to reject the parole recommendation, but Doug Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who appeared at the hearing, have advocated on behalf of his release. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. sent a note to the board during the hearing that was read aloud, in which he pledged his support and said that he would be proud to be Sirhan's friend if he's released. RFK Jr. believes a second gunman was responsible for the shots that killed his father, and sloppy work by the LAPD has left that theory open, but it's not widely held by those who've looked closely at the case. After the board recommended parole, Sirhan found members of the Redemption Row crew waiting for him. Baptiste told me, quote, we started cheering and yelling and hugging and lifting him up on our shoulders. It was pretty much the most amazing wave of emotion I've felt since I've been in prison. California Governor Newsom can reject the board's recommendation of parole, but if he approves it, Sirhan still has one more hurdle to overcome, his immigration status. Sirhan was a green card holder, but faces potential deportation to Jordan, where he lived as a refugee only, if he is freed. Baptiste said that Sirhan desperately hopes to stay in Pasadena, where he dreams of sitting on the beach and sharing long conversations with Munir. So, Kim, as a Californian, how is this situation playing out there? Gavin Newsom could reject the parole, but by law, parole is supposed to be the expectation, not the exception. Do you have any sense of how this is going to play out? And I think it will depend on whether or not, of course, he survives the recall.
Right. Yeah. I haven't even heard about this really much about this case. Of course, I heard that he had was up for parole. But other than that, I haven't heard about it here in California in the news. But I would suspect that Gavin Newsom would potentially reject the recommendation. And that is because, there's the political climate around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is pretty tense. And California is an area where that debate is also very intense. It's one of the pockets in the country where there's a lot of Jewish residents, and there might be a lot of pushback on that. And Gavin Newsom might feel that it's politically expedient to make that particular group happy if that's what that group decides that they want. So, that's kind of what I would suspect. It's just it's a political hot button. And if if they look at it and say, well, the reason he did this was because of this, XYZ thing, then it's going to be a hot potato.
We talk a lot about criminal justice reform, which is something I support. I know both of you support. And I think a lot of supporters of it often talk about how, we just need to change. There's all these low-level people locked up, and that's the problem. Of course, that's part of the problem. But a big part of the problem is that you have people who did, commit very serious crimes and who needed to be locked away, but they've been locked away for decades. And we have a very elderly prison population. Someone like Sirhan, who is, I think, very clearly rehabilitated, who is at extremely no risk, frankly, of reoffending, and you have this person locked up, even if it's not that you're just feeling compassion for him, this system is overwhelmed by an elderly prison population that is not actually a threat. If they were to be released, they've been rehabilitated, and we absolutely need to make that decision more often, not just in this case, but more across the board.
Yeah, 53 years does seem like enough at this point. He's 77 years old. Kim?
I mean, it's debated, right? Because somebody did lose their life.
Right.
So that person doesn't get another shot. And I'm all about redemption. I'm all about second chances for sure. I've had close family members serve prison time, and I know very intimately how big of a toll this takes on the family and on the individual, and so I'm all about that. But at the same time, we do have to remember that somebody did lose their life. They didn't get a second chance. They didn't get 50 years or even 70 years, or even one more year of their own life. So.
And one thing,
Robbie's right. I mean, we have an aging population, and we do need to rehabilitate people and move them out of the system.
And not just that. One thing I didn't mention, he was also what they call a youthful offender. Under 25, your brain isn't fully developed. He was, I believe, 24 when he committed his crime. So he's just you're not punishing the same person anymore. The person who fired that gun in the Ambassador Hotel at the age of 24 in 1968 is not the same person who's sitting in a San Diego correctional facility at this point at the age of 77. A tragic all around. But Kim, looking forward to your radar next.